The sun hovered low over the desert horizon, casting the ochre sands in molten gold. Smoke curled lazily from the campfires of the Apache village, where families sat in quiet clusters, weaving baskets, tending small fires, and murmuring stories of the old ones. The air was thick with the scent of sage and juniper, a familiar balm to those who had walked these lands for generations. Among them, Nahal moved with quiet grace, her dark eyes taking in every detail, the way the wind bent the tall grasses, the distant ridges of the canyon, the chatter of children echoing like birdsong. She had always felt an unspoken bond with this land, its rhythms syncing with the beats of her heart. That morning, she had been sent to the edge of the village, beyond the stone and brush walls, to collect medicinal herbs. It was a task she enjoyed, solitary and soothing, yet today something pulled her attention elsewhere. Across the valley, a lone figure moved with a predator's precision, tracing the contours of the hills as if reading the landscape like an open scroll. His presence felt almost like a shadow of the canyon itself, silent, unassuming, but impossible to ignore. Nahal's breath caught as she recognized him. Taos, a young warrior from a neighboring band, known for his unmatched skill with bow and spear and the quiet intensity that made even elders pause when he passed. For weeks, rumors had swirled about him, his exploits, his stubborn pride, the way he never lingered too long in any one place. And yet now, standing beneath the pale morning sun, Nahal felt the stirrings of curiosity and something warmer, something unfamiliar. She lowered her gaze, pretending to inspect a cluster of sage, but her heart raced against the rhythm of the world around her. Taos finally noticed her. Their eyes met, a fleeting spark that seemed to stretch across the valley, connecting them with invisible threads of recognition and something more. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect, perhaps, or acknowledgement, and continued his patrol along the ridge, leaving Nahal's pulse hammering in the quiet morning. The day stretched slowly. Nahal moved with purpose, yet her thoughts returned again and again to the silhouette of the lone warrior. The simple act of seeing him had awakened attention within her, a blend of caution and intrigue. She recalled the stories of forbidden bonds between bands, the consequences of reckless emotion, and the silent warnings etched into the songs of their elders. Yet, the pull was undeniable. There was something raw and elemental about Taos, as if he carried the desert's fire within him, a fire she could feel echoing deep in her own chest. As the sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls in shifting shades of red and amber, Nahal gathered the last of the herbs. She moved quietly back toward the village, yet a part of her remained on the ridge, where Taos had vanished into the folds of the earth. That night, the village was alive with storytelling and song, drums beating a rhythm that seemed to resonate with her racing heart. Nahal sat near the fire, weaving the herbs into a small pouch, and found herself tracing the shape of his face in her mind, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the calm determination in his eyes. The longing was subtle, a quiet ember at first, but it would not fade. Somewhere beyond the canyon, Taos too felt it, the ghost of a connection, the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. Their worlds had brushed together for the first time, a quiet collision that would grow into a storm of emotion, tension, and desire neither could resist, though both would pretend they could. The slow burn had begun. Days passed, yet the image of Taos lingered in Nahal's mind like a persistent wind across the canyon. Each morning she rose before dawn, tending the small tasks that tied her to the village, but her thoughts always drifted to the ridge where she had first seen him. She imagined the quiet strength in his movements, the way the sunlight had caught his bow, glinting like fire along the strings. It was maddening, the way one encounter could anchor itself so firmly in her chest. That afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly, Nahal found herself wandering to the northern edge of the village again, drawn by the instinct she could neither name nor resist. The herbs she sought were abundant, but she barely noticed them, her eyes scanning the ridges, hoping, though she would never admit it, that she might catch another glimpse of him. And then she saw movement, a shadow flickering across the rock face, fluid and deliberate. Taos had returned, walking along the familiar path, yet he did not approach. Instead, he paused, his gaze sweeping across the village before settling for a moment on her. The air between them tightened, electric and unspoken. Nahal's fingers trembled as she pretended to check her herbs, but every fiber of her being was tuned to his presence. There was a quiet challenge in his stance, an invisible barrier neither of them yet dared cross. As the afternoon waned, a sudden gust of wind swept through the canyon, lifting dust and scattering petals from the desert blooms. Tao stepped forward instinctively, shielded his eyes, and the motion was so instinctive, so human that Nahal's breath caught. It was a simple act, but it spoke volumes, a protector, a watcher, a presence that demanded acknowledgement. She wanted to speak, to call out, but her voice refused her. Instead, she allowed the moment to stretch, savoring the subtle tension, the quiet dance of two souls circling closer without touching. That evening, drums echoed across the village, calling families to the communal circle. Stories were shared, tales of heroes and ancestors whose deeds carved meaning into the sands of time. Nahal found herself watching the fires, tracing their flickering light as if it could reveal hidden truths. Her thoughts wandered again to Taos. She realized, with a mixture of fear and thrill, that her curiosity had grown into longing. But longing was dangerous. Bonds between bands were delicate, words could wound, and glances could ignite conflict. Still, the ache in her chest was undeniable. Meanwhile, Tao stood beyond the ridge, observing the village from a distance. He had come to ensure safety, to watch, and perhaps to understand the young woman who had stirred something within him. Her presence was like the desert wind, soft, insistent, impossible to ignore. He could feel the pull, subtle and persistent, and yet he resisted, knowing the danger in crossing the boundary too soon. Each day, the quiet observation became a ritual, a silent connection that neither could name aloud. As night fell, the sky erupted in stars, stretching like a tapestry over the vast canyon. Nahal lay on the roof of her family's dwelling, gazing upward, imagining Taos under the same celestial vault. The slow burn between them had begun to crackle, small sparks hidden beneath layers of respect, caution, and unspoken desire. The air was heavy with longing, the weight of things unsaid, of proximity without contact, and yet neither could turn away. The wind carried whispers from the ridges to the village below, and in that faint, haunting murmur, both felt the undeniable truth. The connection had been made. And like the desert sun that rose and fell, it would intensify, relentless and consuming, until it could no longer be ignored. The following days carried with them a restlessness that Nahal could not shake. She moved through her tasks, grinding corn, fetching water, tending to the children, with her usual precision, yet her thoughts drifted elsewhere, always circling back to the figure on the ridge. Her sister teased her for staring too long at nothing, for pausing mid-task as though listening for a sound others could not hear. Nahal brushed the words aside, but inside, she knew, the shadow of Taos had taken root in her. One evening, as the village prepared for a small gathering to celebrate a successful hunt, Nahal carried baskets of roasted corn and venison toward the circle of firelight. The drums began low, steady, echoing the heartbeat of the earth itself. Laughter rose with the smoke, weaving warmth into the cool desert air. Families settled in, sharing stories, singing songs that praised the strength of the hunters and the blessings of the land. And then he was there. Nahal's breath faltered when she saw Taos approach from the edge of the gathering. His presence was quiet, deliberate, like a hawk descending into a field. He spoke little, nodded respectfully to the elders, then took his place among the young men who had joined the hunt. He did not look at her directly, yet she felt his awareness like a flame pressed close to her skin. Every movement of his hand, every shift of his shoulders, seemed magnified, pulled into sharp focus by her stolen glances. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced across his face. Nahal caught the curve of his jaw, the way his lips pressed into a line as he listened to the stories. She lowered her gaze quickly, but heat rose in her chest, betraying her calm exterior. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the drums, fast and unsteady. At one point, a child stumbled near the flames, and Taos moved instantly, steadying the boy with a hand firm yet gentle. The small act drew murmurs of approval from those nearby, but for Nahal, it was more than kindness, it was revelation. Beneath the silence and the warrior's pride, there was tenderness, a core of protection that mirrored what she had felt in that first glance on the ridge. Their eyes met then, for the briefest moment across the fire. Neither smiled, neither spoke, but the connection burned through the night air, thick and unyielding. It was not yet love, too soon, too dangerous, but it was something undeniable, something ancient as the land beneath their feet. Later, when the songs ended and the fire burned low, Nahal carried the empty baskets back to her dwelling. She moved slowly, dragging out the moment, hoping perhaps she might catch another glimpse of him. And she did. Tao stood at the far edge of the gathering, half in shadow, his gaze fixed on the dying flames. He turned, and though the distance was wide, Nahal felt his eyes on her. Neither moved, neither spoke. But the silence between them was more intimate than words. That night, lying beneath the stars, Nahal could not sleep. She replayed every glance, every brush of air between them, every unspoken word. Her body ached with a yearning she barely understood, and her heart carried both fear and anticipation. She knew the path they tread was dangerous. Alliances between bands were fragile, and desire could fracture peace. But she could no longer pretend indifference. The slow burn within her was spreading, a quiet wildfire waiting for its spark. Taos too lay awake, staring at the endless constellations above. He told himself he came to the gathering out of duty, to honor the hunt, to show his respect. But he knew the truth. He had wanted to see her again, to test whether what he felt on the ridge was real. And it was. Stronger now, undeniable. She was the desert flower blooming between stone, fragile yet fierce, and he was already caught in her pull. Neither of them spoke the truth aloud. Not yet. But across the firelight, something had shifted, something neither of them could ever undo. The desert dawn came cool and blue, the sky streaked with pale rose as if painted by unseen hands. Nahal woke before the others, restless from dreams that tangled themselves with firelight and a pair of eyes that would not leave her. She slipped quietly from her family's dwelling, pulling her shawl close around her shoulders, and walked toward the stream that wound its way through the canyon. The air smelled of wet stone and sage, a balm against the heat that would soon rise. She knelt at the water's edge, dipping her hands into the current, letting the cold shock bring her back to herself. Yet even here, in the hush of morning, she felt the same tug, the awareness of being watched. And when she lifted her head, there he was. Tao stood across the stream, his silhouette dark against the glowing canyon wall. He had approached without a sound, as if the earth itself had carried him to her. For a moment, neither moved. The only sound was the water rushing over stone and the faint call of a hawk circling overhead. Finally, he crossed. His steps were deliberate, slow, respectful. When he stopped before her, only a few feet away, Nahal felt the world narrow until there was nothing but him, the line of his shoulders, the depth in his eyes, the quiet strength in the way he held himself. "You walk early," Tao said at last, his voice low, rough with disuse. Nahal's throat tightened. It was the first time she had heard him speak, and the sound resonated through her like the drumbeats of ceremony. She gathered herself, fingers clutching the edges of her shawl. "I come for the herbs," she answered softly, nodding toward the satchel at her side. "The morning gives them strength." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The morning gives strength to many things." Her chest tightened at the way his words lingered, carrying meaning beneath their surface. She lowered her gaze, but her pulse hammered wildly. Silence stretched again, yet it was not empty. It brimmed with possibility, with questions neither dared to voice. Taos shifted, his hand brushing the hilt of his knife, not in threat but in habit. "I have watched," he said carefully. "You tend your people with patience." His eyes searched hers, steady, unwavering. Few notice the way the small things matter. Nahal's breath caught. Praise was not easily given among their people, and from him it felt heavy, significant. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "And I have seen you," she said quietly, surprising herself with her boldness. "You guard even when no one asks." The words hung between them, fragile and daring. For the first time, she saw something soften in his expression, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. Their gazes locked, and it was as if the stream itself held its breath. Nahal wanted to say more, to ask the questions that pressed against her chest, why he lingered on the ridges, why his presence felt like both danger and safety. But voices rose from the village in the distance, calling the day into motion. She knew their moment was ending. Taos glanced toward the sound, then back to her. His jaw tightened as though he wrestled with something unspoken. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and deliberate, before stepping back toward the stream. Nahal's heart ached with the sudden space between them. She wanted to reach out, to hold him there, but her hand remained still against her shawl. Instead, she watched as he crossed the water again, his figure dissolving into the canyon's shadows. Only when he was gone did she let herself exhale. Their first words had been simple, almost ordinary, yet they carried the weight of an oath. Something had begun, something neither of them could now deny. And though the sun had not yet risen fully, Nahal felt as if the day had already caught fire. The days following their first exchange blurred together, each carrying a quiet charge that hummed beneath the ordinary rhythm of village life. Nahal moved through her duties, gathering herbs, grinding maize, stitching beadwork, yet every task seemed sharpened, alive with awareness. She could feel him even when he wasn't there. The ridges, once just stone and shadow, now held meaning, as if Taos himself had carved his presence into the land. Every glance toward the horizon felt like searching. Every sound carried the possibility of his approach, and then, sometimes, he was there. She saw him from a distance at first, patrolling, scouting, lingering near the boundaries of her people's land. He never intruded, never pushed beyond what was respectful, yet his nearness unsettled her, filling her chest with a restless ache. It was as if the desert itself conspired to draw them together. The wind bending grass in his direction, the hawk's cry pulling her gaze toward him, the fire at night cracking in rhythms that echoed the beat of her heart. It became unbearable to pretend indifference. One evening, Nahal walked to gather water at the stream. The sun had dipped low, washing the canyon in copper light. The water glowed like molten metal, each ripple catching fire. She knelt, filling her clay vessel, when a shift in the air told her she was not alone. She turned, and there he was, stepping out from behind the stone, the warrior who had haunted her every thought. Her pulse leapt. "You walk often where I walk," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. Taos paused, studying her as though weighing whether to answer. "The land is wide," he said slowly, "but it carries us to the same place." It was an admission, subtle, veiled, but real. She lowered her gaze to the vessel, hands trembling as she lifted it from the water. When she stood, the clay slipped slightly in her grasp. Before she could recover, his hand shot out, steadying the vessel with ease. For the first time, their hands brushed. It was nothing, a fleeting contact, skin against skin, but Nahal's entire body lit with heat. She froze, afraid to move, afraid to shatter the fragile electricity crackling between them. Taos did not withdraw immediately. His fingers lingered on the curve of the vessel, close enough that their knuckles touched. His eyes searched hers, and in that moment the world fell away, the water, the canyon, the endless horizon. There was only him and the fire between them. She swallowed hard, finally reclaiming the vessel. "You guard the stream, too?" she asked softly, words faltering into a smile that wasn't truly a smile. His lips twitched, the ghost of amusement passing across his face. "The stream does not need guarding," he said, his gaze deepened, voice lowering, "but some who walk here might." The words struck her like an arrow, piercing straight to the place she tried to hide. She wanted to speak, to ask what he meant, but the intensity in his eyes silenced her. He was so close now she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the faint sheen of sweat on his temple, the softness in him that contradicted every story she had heard of his fierceness. Nahal stepped back, clutching the vessel to her chest as though it could shield her. The distance helped her breathe again, but it did not cool the fire. "Your people will miss you," she said, though her voice was not steady. Taos studied her a moment longer, then gave a single nod. "And yours will wonder why you linger." His tone was not rebuke, it was a mirror, reflecting back the truth neither wanted to admit. He stepped away first, disappearing into the rising shadows, leaving Nahal trembling by the stream. She stood there until the copper light faded into twilight, until her breath slowed, until she could pretend she was whole again. But she was not anymore. That night, Nahal joined her family around the fire. The laughter, the songs, the warm weight of community, they should have comforted her. Instead, they felt distant, muted, as though she stood outside herself. Every flicker of flame reminded her of his eyes. Every brush of wind carried the echo of his voice. She glanced toward the ridges, dark now under the starlit sky. Somewhere beyond them, he was there, watching, waiting, carrying the same fire she carried. And it frightened her, because the fire was growing, and soon silence would no longer be enough to contain it. The night began calm, stars wheeling across the sky in endless silence, but Nahel had a heaviness in her chest she could not explain. It was the kind of weight her grandmother used to call the whisper of storms, the sense that something was coming, unseen but certain. She lay awake on the roof of her dwelling, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the soft breath of her family below. The desert seemed too still, the wind too hushed, the fire's embers glowing too faintly. Her gaze drifted to the ridges, dark against the sky, where she had seen Taos so many nights. For once, she did not see him. That absence unsettled her more than his presence ever had. The unease found its answer just before dawn. A shout tore through the village, sharp, urgent. Nahel bolted upright as more voices rose, mingling with the sound of horses, of movement in the shadows. She rushed down from the roof, heart pounding, and saw figures emerging from the dark. Raiders' men from a distant band, their faces painted, weapons glinting in the dim light. They had come fast, using the cover of night, seeking to strike before the village could rise. Chaos erupted. Men shouted, women gathered children, elders called for order. The fire pits flared as kindling was thrown in, casting light on the attackers closing in from the canyon's edge. Nahel froze for a moment, terror rooting her to the ground, until a familiar figure burst from the ridge. Taos. He moved like a storm breaking loose, bow already in hand, arrows flying with deadly precision. The raiders faltered at the sudden assault, their advance slowed by his ferocity. In that moment, Nahel's fear broke into something else, a fierce, desperate relief. He was here, but the fight was not yet theirs to win. Nahel, her sister shouted, dragging her back to the moment. Help the children. She turned, gathering two little ones into her arms, rushing them toward the safety of the larger dwelling, where women and elders fortified the door with stones and timber. Her heart raced as she returned for more, weaving through the panic. Each time she glanced toward the edge of battle, she saw him, Taos, moving with precision, his blade flashing when arrows no longer served him. He fought not as an outsider, but as if the village were his own, as if every life here mattered to him. For a moment, their eyes locked across the firelit chaos. Time seemed to still. His face was streaked with sweat and dust, but his gaze was steady, commanding, filled with something that made her chest seize. She knew then, without words, he was fighting for them, for her. The clash raged on. At last, the raiders began to break, retreating into the canyon when they realized the village would not fall easily. Shouts turned into warnings, then into silence as the dust of their retreat settled. The people gathered slowly, trembling, checking the wounded. The village elder raised his voice, strong despite his age. They will not return soon. Tonight we have endured. A murmur of relief spread, but Nahel's attention was fixed elsewhere. Taos stood at the edge of the firelight, chest heaving, his blade still slick. His presence seemed larger now, not just the solitary warrior she had watched from afar, but a force that had altered the course of the night. And when their gazes met again, something raw surged between them. Gratitude, fear, longing, all tangled together. She moved to him before she could think. Her steps carried her across the trampled earth, past the murmurs of families, until she stood before him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air was thick with smoke, the taste of iron, the beating of hearts that refused to calm. "You came," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. Taos's eyes held hers, dark and unflinching. "Did you doubt I would?" Her breath faltered. She wanted to deny it, to hide the truth, but the words would not come. Instead, she shook her head, fingers curling against her shawl. "No," she admitted softly. "But still," he stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint tremor in his hand, the adrenaline still coursing through him. His voice dropped, meant only for her. "I would not let harm touch you." The confession, quiet as it was, struck deeper than any blade. Nahel felt the world tilt, her chest tight with emotions she could not name aloud. Her instinct was to reach for him, to place her hand against the strength of his arm, to prove to herself he was real. But the weight of watching eyes held her back. Their people were here, watching, whispering. Instead, she said the only words she could manage, "My people owe you." He tilted his head, studying her, as though searching for what she did not say. Then, finally, he replied, voice soft and edged with something dangerous. "And you. What do you owe?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. The silence stretched heavy until he stepped back, breaking it himself. "I will walk the ridges," he said, voice steady again. "They may return." And with that, he turned, vanishing once more into the darkness beyond the firelight. Nahel stood frozen, her heart pounding as though she had run across the entire desert. His words haunted her. "And you, what do you owe?" She carried them back with her as she rejoined her family, as she tended the wounded, as the village slowly quieted under the weight of exhaustion. When at last she lay beneath the stars again, she felt the echo of his nearness, the ghost of his voice. She owed him her gratitude, her respect, but in her heart she knew it was already more, much more, and the thought both terrified and thrilled her. The slow burn had flared tonight into open fire, and though the raiders had gone, the storm within her had only just begun. The night before the final ceremony stretched long, taut as a bowstring. Shadows of the fire flickered across the painted lodge walls, where elders whispered prayers in Apache, their voices a steady rhythm against the crackle of cedar. Chenoa sat apart, her dark hair braided in two long plaits, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her chest rose and fell, but her gaze was fixed, resolute. She knew what mourning meant. Mourning meant binding paths or severing them. Mourning meant choosing courage, even if it split her heart open. Eliashood's voice carried through the quiet, low and strong as he spoke with the medicine man. His profile glowed in the firelight. Stern, scarred by life, but softened now by something she hadn't allowed herself to name. When his gaze broke from the circle and caught hers, she looked away too quickly, heat flaring across her face. Longing was dangerous. It could undo everything. Dawn came dressed in crimson and gold, painting the sky above the white mountains. Mist clung to the ground, curling around the ankles of those gathering. The final ceremony of the sunrise dance had come, where girls stepped into womanhood, where balance and blessings were sealed for the year to come. Chenoa stood adorned in a fringed white buckskin dress, the beadwork glinting faintly. Around her wrists, strings of shells clicked softly. Her face was painted with lines of yellow pollen, symbols of strength and protection. Every step she took, she felt the earth hum beneath her feet. Eliashood stood at the edge of the circle, dressed in his best. A dark cotton shirt embroidered with red, his moccasins polished, eagle feathers bound in his hair. He was not inside the ceremony's sacred space, yet his presence was felt as sharply as the cold morning air. Chenoa's eyes sought him once, then again, even though she knew she shouldn't. She should be focusing on the dance, the chants, the drums. Yet every time her foot pressed into the earth, every time the rhythm surged through her, she thought of the way Eliashood's voice had steadied her when she doubted, the way his hand had lingered a breath longer than it should when passing her a gourd of water. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, bright, and unyielding. The young dancers moved in wide arcs, their shadows circling like hawks. Sweat glistened across Chenoa's temples, but she kept her pace, her chin lifted. When the drums slowed, when the dancers paused to drink and rest, she stole a glance at him. He was closer now, standing just beyond the ceremonial line, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with something barely restrained. Finally, when the others drifted toward the shade, she found herself alone, walking to the river's edge. She knelt, scooping water in her palms, watching it trickle through her fingers like time itself slipping away. Behind her, footsteps. She didn't need to look. "You danced with fire," Eliashood's voice came husky. "The spirits will not forget it." Chenoa turned her head slowly, her breath catching. He was close, too close, though still respectful of the sacred space between them. His hand flexed at his side, as though it ached to reach for her. "And will you?" she asked, her words trembling with more weight than she intended. His silence was thunder. His eyes told her everything, how long he had waited, how fiercely he had fought against what already bound them together. He took one step closer, the river's light dancing across his cheekbones. "I should not, but I will." The truth sat between them, undeniable as the sun overhead. They could not touch, not yet. The ceremony was not finished, and to break it would dishonor all. But in their silence, in the way their breaths matched, in the way the earth itself seemed to lean closer, it was enough. When the last dance ended at sunset, when the chants had ceased and the fire's final sparks flew skyward, Chenoa stood in the cooling twilight, her body aching, her spirit renewed. Eliashood approached, slowly, like a hunter wary of breaking the stillness. Around them, families laughed and shared food, but the world narrowed to two figures standing inches apart. "You are no longer a girl," he said softly, reverence in his voice. "You are a woman who carries the fire of her people." Her throat tightened. "And what of you, Eliashood? What do you carry?" He lifted his hand then, finally, daring to brush his fingers against hers. Just the barest touch, electric and forbidden. "You," he whispered. The word was a vow, a surrender, a beginning. The stars rose, ancient witnesses to their union. Chenoa tilted her face up to the sky, then back to him. She smiled, not girlishly, but with the quiet, devastating power of someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger. And for the first time, she did not look away when he looked at her. They did not kiss that night. They did not need to. Desire and devotion simmered between them like coals under ash, waiting, glowing, cert. The fire at dawn had carried them here, and now nothing could unmake it.